The fluorescent lights of the Yamanote line flickered in that peculiar rhythm that only Tokyo trains seem to master, casting everything in a sickly pale glow that made the 11 p.m. commuters look like ghosts of themselves. Tomoe had been awake for 37 hours straight, and her body had finally surrendered to the inevitable. Her head tilted sideways, searching for purchase, and found it on the shoulder of a stranger. A man in an immaculate charcoal suit, his posture so rigid it seemed carved from marble. She didn't register his presence beyond the basic fact that he was solid, warm, and conveniently there. Her eyes closed before her mind could process the impropriety of it all. When she woke, the train had stopped at Shibuya Station, and the man's arm was still there, cradling her head with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his appearance. His face was partially obscured by the collar of his jacket, but what she could see was sharp, angular cheekbones, a jawline that looked like it had been drawn by someone who understood the geometry of danger. There was a scar running from his left temple to his cheekbone, thin but deliberate, like a signature written in violence. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were the color of winter rain, gray and impenetrable. "You drooled," he said, his voice low and carrying the kind of authority that made the other passengers unconsciously lean away. It wasn't cruel, exactly. More like a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone someone might use to say the weather was cold. Tomo jerked upright, her face flooding with heat. She was a translator for a pharmaceutical company, a woman who prided herself on professionalism, on maintaining the invisible walls that kept the world at a comfortable distance. And here she was, having violated every boundary of personal space with a complete stranger. "I'm sorry, she started, but the words tangled in her throat when she noticed the way other passengers were looking at this man. Not with annoyance or amusement, but with something closer to fear. A woman 3 seats down quickly averted her gaze. A businessman pretended to be deeply absorbed in his phone. Even the train attendant who passed through seemed to move faster, more carefully, around this particular section of the car. "It's fine," Haruto said. And something in the way he said it made it clear that whether it was fine or not was entirely his decision to make. He straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, and Tomoe caught a glimpse of the edge of a tattoo disappearing beneath his collar. Intricate, traditional, the kind that meant something in this city, the kind that meant everything. She should have known then. Some part of her probably did know, the way animals know when they're in the presence of a predator. But Tomoe had spent the last 3 decades of her life, all 28 years of it, being careful. Careful with her words, careful with her emotions, careful with her choices. She had built a life of such meticulous control that spontaneity had become a foreign language. So when Haruto's eyes lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary, when he reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that seemed impossible coming from someone who radiated such danger, she didn't pull away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tomoe." "Tomo?" he repeated, as if testing the weight of it on his tongue. "That's a warrior's name. Are you a warrior, Tomo?" She should have lied. She should have said yes, should have claimed some strength she didn't possess. Instead, she told him the truth. "No, I'm just tired." Something flickered across his face. Amusement, perhaps, or recognition. Honesty. That's rare. He turned slightly, and she saw the full extent of the tattoo now, visible on his neck, where his collar had shifted. A dragon, rendered in the classical style, its scales intricate and alive-looking even in the harsh train lighting. "I'm Haruto." The train pulled away from Shibuya Station, and Tomo should have gotten off. She should have stood up, thanked him for his inadvertent kindness, and disappeared into the Tokyo night. Instead, she found herself asking, "Do you always let strangers sleep on your arm?" "No," he said. "Never." There was a finality to that statement that should have warned her. But what she heard instead was the suggestion that she was somehow different, somehow special enough to break his rules. It was a dangerous thing to hear when you were exhausted and lonely, and had spent so long being invisible that the idea of being seen, really seen, by someone felt like oxygen after drowning. They talked for the next 3 stops. Tomo told him about the pharmaceutical translation project that had consumed her life for the past month, about how she'd been translating clinical trial data and regulatory documents until the words had started to blur together into meaninglessness. She told him about her small apartment in Shinjuku, about her cat named Sensei, who judged her life choices silently from the windowsill. She told him things she didn't usually tell people, things that emerged from her mouth as if they'd been waiting for permission to exist. Haruto, in turn, told her almost nothing. He asked questions, good questions, the kind that made her feel like he was genuinely interested in her answers. But when she tried to reciprocate, he deflected with the ease of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of revelation without disclosure. "I work in business," he said when she asked what he did. "Import and export, mostly." The way he said it, with that particular emphasis on the words, made it clear that this was the story he was offering, and she was welcome to believe it or not. But she believed it anyway. Or at least she believed the version of him that existed in this fluorescent-lit bubble of the train car. She believed in the man who spoke softly, who looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he'd encountered in years, who made her feel like her exhaustion and her vulnerability were not weaknesses, but rather invitations to be known. When the train reached Shinjuku Station, Haruto stood. "This is your stop," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you? You told me where you lived." He smiled then, and it transformed his face completely. The danger didn't disappear, but it became something else, something almost beautiful in its complexity. "I have a good memory for details." He walked her to the platform, and in the cool night air of the station, Tomo felt the spell beginning to break. In the harsh fluorescent light, she could see him more clearly now. The expensive watch, the way his suit was tailored to perfection, the subtle deference with which other people moved around him, even here, in this crowded station. There was something about him that commanded space, that made the world reorganize itself around his presence. "Can I see you again?" he asked as they reached the top of the stairs leading out of the station. Tomo knew she should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this man was dangerous, that whatever he did for a living involved more than import and export, that getting involved with him would be like stepping into a current that would sweep her away from everything safe and familiar. But she was tired of being safe. She was tired of being invisible. "Yes," she said. He took her phone and entered his number with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he was accustomed to people saying yes to him. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "There's a restaurant in Roppongi. Dinner at 8. It wasn't a question, and somehow that made it more appealing rather than less. In a world where she spent so much time translating the careful, hedged language of corporate communication, there was something intoxicating about a man who simply stated what he wanted. She watched him disappear back into the station, his silhouette swallowed by the crowd, and only then did she pull out her phone to look at the contact he'd created. Just a name and a number. No last name. No additional information. Just Haruto, as if that was all anyone needed to know. It wasn't until 3 days later, when she was having lunch with her colleague Yuki at a small ramen shop near their office, that everything changed. Yuki had gone pale when Tomo mentioned the name casually, almost as an afterthought while discussing her upcoming dinner date. "Tomo," Yuki said slowly, setting down her chopsticks with deliberate care. "What exactly did this man look like?" She described him. The scar, the tattoo, the way he carried himself like he owned the space around him. Yuki's face got progressively whiter with each detail. "Oh my God," Yuki whispered. "Tomoe, do you know who that is? He said he works in import and export. He's Haruto Yamamoto. He's Tomoe. He's the Oyabun of the Yamamoto Gumi. He runs one of the most powerful Yakuza syndicates in Tokyo. He's not just dangerous, he's legendary. There are stories about him, things he's done." Yuki trailed off, looking genuinely frightened. "You need to cancel that dinner. You need to block his number and pretend this never happened." But Tomo didn't cancel the dinner. She told herself it was because she was curious, because she wanted to understand the contradiction between the gentleman on the train and the criminal that Yuki had described. The truth, though, was more complicated and more dangerous. The truth was that she had already begun to fall, and falling, she had discovered, was far more addictive than safety had ever been. The restaurant in Roppongi was exactly what she should have expected. Exclusive, expensive, The kind of place where the other diners were either Yakuza or people who had learned not to ask questions. Haruto was already there when she arrived, seated at a private table in the back, away from prying eyes. He stood when she approached, and the gesture was so courtly, so at odds with everything she now knew about him, that it made her chest ache. "You came," he said as if there had been any doubt. "You said 8 o'clock, she replied, sitting across from him. "I did." He smiled that transformative smile again. "I wasn't sure you would, after you found out who I am." So he knew that she knew. Of course he knew. A man like Haruto would have people watching, would have anticipated her discovery, would have calculated her response before she even made it. "How did you know I found out?" she asked. "Because you're here," he said simply. "If you were going to run, you would have done it already. But you came anyway. That tells me something important about you, Tomo." "What does it tell you?" He leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes intense in the candlelight. "It tells me that you're braver than you think, or perhaps more foolish. I haven't decided which yet." The dinner was extraordinary and terrible and perfect. Haruto told her stories, carefully edited stories, she suspected, but stories nonetheless. He told her about growing up in Yokohama, about a father who had been Yakuza and a mother who had tried desperately to keep him away from that life. He told her about the moment he realized that some men were born for power, and some were born to serve, and that he had always known which category he fell into. He told her about the scar on his face. A rival had given it to him when he was 23, a reminder of the price of ambition. But he didn't tell her about the violence. He didn't tell her about the people who had disappeared, about the businesses that had been destroyed, about the blood that had been spilled to build and maintain his empire. He told her the parts of his story that could be romanticized, the parts that could be transformed into tragedy rather than crime. And Tomoe, desperate to believe in the version of him he was presenting, let herself be seduced by the narrative. When he walked her home that night, he kissed her on the steps of her apartment building. It was gentle and thorough, and left her breathless. "I want to see you again," he said. "Often." "This is insane," she whispered, but she was already nodding, already agreeing. "Yes," he said, "but sometimes the best things are." Over the next 3 months, Tomo fell into a relationship with Haruto that existed in a strange pocket of reality, separate from the normal world. He would call her at odd hours and ask her to meet him at restaurants or hotels or private clubs where she was always the only woman without a visible connection to the Yakuza underworld. He was attentive and thoughtful, remembering details about her life that she had mentioned only in passing. He brought her gifts, expensive jewelry that she was terrified to wear, books she had mentioned wanting to read, flowers that appeared at her apartment with no explanation beyond a note that said simply, "Thinking of you." But there were also moments of profound strangeness, times when he would receive a phone call and his entire demeanor would shift, the gentleness evaporating to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. Times when she would see bruises on his knuckles and ask what happened, and he would deflect with a smile. Times when she would catch him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between tenderness and calculation, as if he was trying to solve an equation and she was the unknown variable. Her friends begged her to leave him. Her mother, when Tomo finally confessed the relationship to her, had wept. "You're going to get hurt," her mother had said, "or worse. Men like that, they don't know how to love. They only know how to possess." But Tomo couldn't leave. She was trapped in the paradox of loving someone who was fundamentally unknowable, of being drawn deeper into a world that terrified her precisely because it fascinated her. She told herself that she could change him, that her love could be redemptive, that beneath the Yakuza boss was a man capable of genuine connection. It was a dangerous story to tell herself, but it was also irresistible. Then came the night that everything fractured. Haruto had asked her to meet him at a private residence in the Minato ward, a penthouse apartment that she had never seen before. When she arrived, she found him in the living room, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking out at the glittering expanse of Tokyo below. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence immediately. There was a tension in his shoulders that she had learned to recognize. The tension that preceded violence. "Sit," he said finally, still not turning around. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her heart beginning to race. "What's wrong?" "I received some information today," he said slowly. "About you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Tomo felt her mouth go dry. What kind of information? "The kind that suggests you might not be exactly who you've told me you are." He turned then, and his face was unreadable. "My people did a background check. Standard procedure for anyone in my life. And they found something interesting. Your pharmaceutical company, they do a lot of work with law enforcement agencies, and you, specifically, have access to classified information about ongoing investigations." "Haruto, are you working for the police?" he asked, his voice so quiet it was almost gentle. "Are you an informant?" "No!" The denial came out sharp and desperate. "No, I'm not. I translate documents. I don't have access to anything classified. I don't even know what investigations you're talking about." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating, weighing her words against whatever his people had told him. "I want to believe you," he said finally. "But I can't afford to be wrong about this. I can't afford to have someone close to me who might be reporting my movements to the authorities." "I'm not," she said, standing up, moving toward him. "Haruto, I swear to you, I would never—" "Come here," he said, and she obeyed, drawn to him like a moth to flame. He took her face in his hands, and his touch was so tender that it broke her heart. "If I find out that you've lied to me, if I discover that you've been working against me, I will have to do things that I don't want to do. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not lying." He kissed her forehead, and it felt like a benediction and a threat all at once. "Good. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Tomo. And I'm not a man who takes betrayal lightly." The investigation into Haruto Yamamoto had been running for 18 months before Tomoe even met him on that train. Detective Keisuke Sato had dedicated nearly 2 years of his life to building a case against the Yamamoto Gumi, following threads of money laundering, extortion, and suspected involvement in human trafficking. Sato was meticulous. The kind of detective who kept detailed notes, who followed protocol, who believed that patience and evidence would eventually prevail over power and connections. He was also, by the standards of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, considered somewhat naive. When Tomoe had first been flagged by Sato's team as a potential asset, it wasn't because she had any criminal connections or because she was suspected of wrongdoing. It was simply that her job gave her access to certain kinds of information, and her proximity to Haruto Yamamoto made her potentially valuable. Sato had approached her carefully, respectfully, explaining that her cooperation could help bring down one of the most dangerous men in Tokyo. He had made it sound noble, like she would be helping to protect the city. He hadn't mentioned the danger. He hadn't mentioned what would happen if Haruto discovered her involvement. Tomoe had refused. She had been adamant about it, had told Sato that she couldn't do it, that she wasn't equipped for that kind of deception. Sato had accepted her refusal with surprising grace, had told her that if she changed her mind, she could contact him. He had given her a card with his number on it, and she had thrown it away the moment he left her apartment. But then she had met Haruto on the train, and everything had changed. Suddenly, the detective's request didn't seem like an abstract moral dilemma. It became a very real and present crisis. She was in love with a man who was almost certainly guilty of terrible crimes. She was complicit in his world simply by being in his life. And now, after his accusation about her potential involvement with law enforcement, she was terrified that her refusal to cooperate with the police would somehow be discovered, that her innocence would be interpreted as guilt. She spent the night after Haruto's interrogation unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling of her apartment while Sensei, her cat, watched her with what she imagined was feline judgment. She replayed the conversation over and over in her mind, analyzing every word, every inflection, trying to determine if he had believed her. The problem was that she couldn't tell. Haruto was too controlled, too practiced at hiding his thoughts. He could believe her completely, or he could be planning her disappearance. There was no way to know. By morning, she had made a decision that terrified her. She called Detective Sato. They met in a coffee shop in Shinjuku, a public place where Haruto's people would be less likely to make a move against her, though Tomoe suspected that if Haruto wanted her dead, the location wouldn't matter much. Sato arrived exactly on time, ordered a black coffee, and waited until the barista had moved away before speaking. "I wasn't sure you'd call," he said. "I wasn't sure either," Tomoe replied. Her hands were shaking, and she clasped them together on the table to hide it. "But I need to know something first. If I help you, if I give you information, what happens to him?" Sato's expression didn't change. "We build a case. We gather evidence. Eventually, we arrest him and he stands trial. And if he's convicted, he goes to prison. Probably for a very long time." Tomoe felt something crack inside her chest. She had known this intellectually, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way that was almost unbearable. "And if he finds out that I helped you?" "He won't," Sato said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't entirely confident about this. "You don't know that." "No," Sato admitted. "I don't. But I know that if you don't help us, more people are going to get hurt. The Yamamoto Gumi isn't just involved in Yakuza activities. We have evidence that they're trafficking women from Southeast Asia, holding them in debt bondage, forcing them into sex work. We have evidence of extortion, of violence, of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of government. Haruto Yamamoto isn't a romantic figure, Ms. Tomoe. He's a predator." She wanted to argue with him, wanted to defend Haruto, wanted to insist that the man she knew was different from the criminal that Sato was describing. But she couldn't, because she knew that both versions of Haruto existed simultaneously. The gentle man who had held her while she slept on the train and the ruthless crime boss were not separate entities. They were two aspects of the same person, and pretending otherwise was a luxury she could no longer afford. "What do you need from me?" she asked. What Sato needed was information. He needed to know about Haruto's movements, his associates, the locations where he conducted business. He needed access to his communications, his financial records, anything that could be used to build a case. He explained that she wouldn't need to do anything dramatic or dangerous. Just keep her eyes and ears open, report what she observed, allow her apartment to be used as a location for surveillance equipment. Tomoe agreed to all of it, and in doing so, she crossed a line that she knew she could never uncross. She became an informant, a traitor, a woman living a double life. Every time Haruto called her, every time she saw him, she was gathering intelligence. Every kiss felt like a betrayal. Every intimate moment was shadowed by the knowledge of what she was doing. The first piece of information she provided was about a meeting scheduled for the following week at a warehouse in Odaiba. Haruto had mentioned it casually while they were in bed together, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder as he talked about a shipment that needed to be moved. She had filed the information away and reported it to Sato the next day. Within hours, the warehouse had been placed under surveillance, but Haruto never went to that meeting. Instead, he called her that afternoon and asked her to meet him at a hotel in Shibuya. When she arrived, she found him in a state she had never seen before. Agitated, angry, his usual composure fractured like thin ice. "Someone tipped off the police about the warehouse," he said without preamble. "They were waiting. If I had gone there, I would have been arrested." Tomo's heart stopped. "How did you find out?" "I have people everywhere," he said. "People in the police department, people in the government. They warned me." He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make his point. "Someone betrayed me, Tomo. Someone close to me. And I need to know if it was you." "It wasn't," she said. And the lie came out smooth and practiced. She had been rehearsing this moment in her head for days, preparing for the possibility that he would suspect her. "Look at me," he commanded, and she did, meeting his gray eyes and trying to project innocence while her entire body screamed with guilt. "I need you to understand something. If I find out that you've been working against me, if I discover that you've betrayed me to the police, I will have to kill you. Not because I want to, but because I have to. Because allowing betrayal to go unpunished would make me weak, and weakness is a luxury I can't afford in my world." "I haven't betrayed you," she said, and it was the most honest lie she had ever told. He studied her for a long moment, then released her wrist. "I believe you," he said finally. "But I'm going to have my people watch you more closely from now on. For your protection, of course. To make sure that no one tries to use you against me." What he meant was that she was going to be under constant surveillance. Her apartment would be watched. Her phone would be monitored. Her movements would be tracked. She had become a prisoner in a gilded cage, and the bars were made of his love and his suspicion in equal measure. That night, after Haruto left, Tomoe called Detective Sato and told him what had happened. Sato's response was immediate and practical. They would need to be more careful, would need to find ways to communicate that wouldn't be detected by Haruto's people. He suggested a dead drop system, a way for her to leave information in predetermined locations where it could be retrieved without direct contact. He also suggested very carefully that she might want to consider ending the relationship with Haruto, that her safety was becoming increasingly compromised. But Tomo couldn't end it. She was in too deep, trapped in a web of her own making. And beyond the practical considerations, there was something else. A stubborn, irrational part of her that still believed that Haruto could be saved, that her love could somehow redeem him, that if she just held on long enough, everything would work out. It was a dangerous fantasy, but it was hers, and she clung to it. The next 3 months were a careful dance of deception and survival. Tomo provided information to Sato through the dead drop system, details about meetings, names of associates, financial information that she managed to photograph when Haruto left documents unattended. The police used this information to build their case, to identify key players in the Yamamoto Gumi organization, to map out the network of corruption that protected Haruto from prosecution. But Haruto was careful, and he was intelligent, and he had resources that the police department struggled to match. For every move that Sato made, Haruto seemed to anticipate it. Meetings would be moved at the last minute. Associates would disappear before they could be questioned. Evidence would vanish. It was as if Haruto had a sixth sense for danger, or as if he had someone on the inside of the investigation feeding him information. Tomo began to wonder if she was being played, if Haruto had known all along that she was working with the police and was simply allowing it to continue for reasons she couldn't fathom. The possibility terrified her. It suggested a level of manipulation and control that went beyond anything she had imagined. Then came the night that changed everything. Haruto had asked her to meet him at the penthouse in Minato again, the same place where he had accused her of being an informant. When she arrived, she found him waiting with a man she had never seen before, older, perhaps in his 60s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. The man was introduced simply as Tanaka, and there was something about him that made Tomo's skin crawl. "Tomo," Haruto said, his voice carefully neutral, "I'd like you to meet someone important. Tanaka is a colleague of mine. He's also a very good friend of someone in the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department." Tomo's stomach dropped. She understood immediately what was happening, understood that this was the moment of reckoning she had been dreading. "It seems," Haruto continued, moving closer to her, "that there's been a leak in the investigation into my organization. Someone has been providing information to the police, and Tanaka's friend in the department has been very helpful in identifying who that someone is." "Haruto," she started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it now, a sharpness that cut through her like a blade. The leak was traced to someone with access to classified information, someone who works for a pharmaceutical company, someone who has been very close to me for the past 3 months. He paused, letting the implications settle over her like a shroud. "The question I've been asking myself," he continued, "is whether you did this because you were coerced by the police, or whether you did it because you never cared about me at all. Whether this entire relationship was a lie from the beginning." Tomoe opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, to explain, but Haruto cut her off again. "Before you answer," he said, "I want you to know that I've already decided what I'm going to do about this, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say. I'm curious to know if you're going to lie to me again, or if you're finally going to tell me the truth." The moment stretched between them, infinite and terrible. Tomo could feel Tanaka watching her, could feel the weight of Haruto's betrayal and disappointment pressing down on her like a physical force. She thought about running, about trying to escape, but she knew that would be futile. Haruto's people were everywhere. There was no escape. So she told him the truth. She told him about Detective Sato's initial approach, about her refusal, and then her change of heart. She told him about the dead drops and the information she had provided. She told him about her fear and her guilt, and her desperate hope that somehow, despite everything, he might understand why she had done it. When she finished, there was silence. Haruto walked to the window and looked out at the glittering expanse of Tokyo below, his silhouette framed against the lights of the city. "Do you know what the worst part is?" he said finally, his voice so quiet she could barely hear it. "It's not that you betrayed me. It's not that you worked with the police. It's that you made me believe that you cared about me. You made me think that I could have something real, something genuine, in a life that has been nothing but lies and violence and compromise. You made me hope, Tomo. And hope is the cruelest thing you can give to a man like me." He turned to face her, and his eyes were wet. She had never seen Haruto cry, had never imagined that he was capable of it. The sight of his tears broke something inside her. "I should kill you," he said. "By the rules of my world, by the code that I've lived by my entire life, I should have you killed. You've betrayed me. You've compromised my organization. You've put everything I've built at risk." "Then do it," Tomo said, and she meant it. She was so tired of living in fear, so exhausted by the weight of her deception. "If that's what needs to happen, then do it." Haruto stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something internal, some fundamental conflict between the man he had been trained to be and the man he wanted to be. "No," he said finally. "I'm not going to kill you, but I am going to disappear. I'm going to leave Tokyo, leave Japan if I have to. I'm going to dismantle my organization and walk away from everything I've built. Because staying here, continuing down this path, it's only going to lead to more death, more destruction, more people like you getting caught in the crossfire." "Haruto, don't," he said, holding up his hand. "Don't say anything. Just listen. I'm going to turn myself in to the police. I'm going to provide them with evidence against my own organization, against the people who work for me, against the government officials who have protected me. I'm going to do it because you made me realize something, Tomo. You made me realize that I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to be a man who has to threaten to kill the woman he loves because she betrayed him. I don't want to be a man who can't have anything real because everything in his life is built on lies and violence." Tomo felt tears streaming down her face. "You're going to prison." "Yes," Haruto said. "I am. But at least I'll go knowing that I chose it. At least I'll go knowing that I tried to do the right thing, even if it's too late to undo all the wrong things I've done." He moved toward her, and she thought for a moment that he was going to hurt her. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and held her, and she could feel him shaking, could feel the weight of his decision settling over him like a physical thing. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I know you don't believe that. I know you think this is just another manipulation. But I do. I love you. And that's why I'm letting you go." The confession came like a thunderbolt through the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. Haruto Yamamoto, one of the most powerful Yakuza bosses in Japan, walked into a police station on a Tuesday morning with his lawyer and offered to provide comprehensive testimony against his own organization. The move was unprecedented, shocking the entire law enforcement community and sending ripples through the criminal underworld that would take months to fully settle. Detective Sato received the news while he was at his desk, reviewing surveillance footage from the Odaiba warehouse. His supervisor called him into her office, closed the door, and told him that their target had just surrendered. Sato's first instinct was to suspect a trap, to assume that this was some kind of elaborate scheme designed to compromise the investigation. But as he listened to the recordings of Haruto's initial statement, as he read through the documents and evidence that Haruto had provided, he began to understand that this was genuine. The Yakuza boss was actually cooperating. The question that haunted Sato, the question that kept him awake at night, was why. He had been a detective long enough to know that men like Haruto Yamamoto didn't simply decide to turn their lives around because of a sudden moral awakening. There had to be a reason, a catalyst. something that had pushed him to make such a dramatic and self-destructive decision. When Sato finally got the opportunity to interview Haruto in the holding cell, he asked him directly, "Why did you do this?" Sato said, settling into the chair across from the Yakuza boss. "Why did you turn yourself in?" Haruto was different in the holding cell than he had been on the streets. Without his tailored suits and his carefully cultivated aura of power, he looked smaller somehow, more human. The scar on his face seemed less intimidating in the harsh fluorescent light, more like a mark of vulnerability than a badge of danger. "Because I was tired," Haruto said simply. "I was tired of being the person I had become. I was tired of the violence, the lies, the constant need to prove myself through cruelty and domination. And because I met someone who made me believe that I could be something different." Sato didn't need to ask who that someone was. He already knew. He had been monitoring Tomo's communications, had seen the way she had struggled with her role as an informant, had watched her fall deeper and deeper in love with a man she was simultaneously betraying. "She's going to testify against you," Sato said. "She's going to help us build a case that will put you away for decades." "I know," Haruto said, "and I deserve it. I deserve everything that's coming to me." The trial took 8 months. It was the largest organized crime prosecution in Japanese history, involving testimony from dozens of witnesses, thousands of pages of evidence, and a level of media attention that turned the courthouse into a circus. Haruto's cooperation was instrumental in dismantling the Yamamoto Gumi, in identifying the network of corruption that had protected the organization for decades, in bringing charges against government officials and police officers who had been complicit in the Yakuza's activities. Tomoe testified on the 3rd day of the trial. She sat in the witness box and answered questions about her relationship with Haruto, about the information she had provided to the police, about the night he had discovered her betrayal. The defense attorney tried to paint her as a woman who had seduced a man for the purposes of espionage, who had used her sexuality as a weapon. But Tomo remained calm and composed, answering each question with precision and honesty. When she was asked to describe her feelings for Haruto, she paused for a long moment before answering. "I loved him," she said finally. "I still do. But I also believed that what he was doing was wrong, that the people he was hurting deserved justice. I had to choose between my love for him and my responsibility to society. And I chose responsibility." The courtroom was silent as she spoke. Even the journalists seemed to understand that they were witnessing something profound, some fundamental human struggle playing out in real time. Haruto watched her from the defendant's table, and Tomoe could see the pain in his eyes. She had expected anger, or bitterness, or the cold calculation that had characterized so much of their relationship. Instead, she saw only sadness and a kind of acceptance that broke her heart all over again. The verdict came on a gray November afternoon. Haruto was convicted on multiple counts of organized crime, money laundering, extortion, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. When the judge read the sentence, Haruto didn't react. He simply nodded, as if he had expected exactly this outcome, as if this was the price he had always known he would have to pay. As he was being led out of the courtroom, he looked directly at Tomoe. For just a moment, their eyes met. And in that moment, she saw everything. All the love and all the pain, all the possibility and all the impossibility of what they had shared. Then he was gone, escorted by guards through a side door, disappearing into the machinery of the justice system. Tomoe left the courthouse in a daze. Reporters shouted questions at her, but she didn't answer. She walked through the crowd with her head down, thinking about the man she had loved and betrayed, wondering if she had done the right thing, or if she had simply destroyed something beautiful in the name of justice. That night she sat in her apartment with Sensei on her lap and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. She had gotten what she wanted. Haruto was in prison, his organization was dismantled, the people he had hurt would have some measure of justice. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that she had played a role in destroying the man she loved. She thought about calling Detective Sato, about asking him if Haruto had said anything about her after the trial. But she didn't. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear whatever answer he might give. Instead, she made a decision. She quit her job at the pharmaceutical company. She couldn't go back to that life, couldn't pretend that everything was normal when her entire world had been turned upside down. She needed to disappear for a while, to figure out who she was outside of her relationship with Haruto, outside of her role as an informant. She took a leave of absence and traveled. She went to Kyoto and spent weeks in temples, meditating and trying to find some kind of peace. She went to Hiroshima and stood in front of memorials to the dead, contemplating the weight of human suffering. She went to small villages in the mountains and stayed in traditional inns, eating simple food and reading books and slowly beginning to heal. It was during this time of wandering that she received a letter. It came to her apartment, forwarded by her landlord, and it bore no return address. Inside was a single page, written in handwriting she recognized immediately. "Tomo," it began. "I don't know if you'll want to read this, but I need to say these things, even if you never read them. I need to put them into words, even if those words disappear into the void. I've had a lot of time to think in here, time to reflect on my life, on the choices I made, on the person I became. And I've come to understand that you didn't destroy me, Tomo. I destroyed myself. You just made me see it clearly enough to finally do something about it. I spent 30 years building an empire of violence and lies. I thought that power was the most important thing, that control was the only way to survive in this world. But then I met you, and you showed me that there was another way to live. You showed me that vulnerability could be a strength, that honesty could be more powerful than any threat, that love could be real even in the midst of deception. I know that what I did, the crimes I committed, the people I hurt, can't be undone. I know that 35 years in prison is probably not enough punishment for all the damage I've caused. But I also know that I'm going to spend those years trying to become a better person, trying to understand the harm I've done, trying to find some kind of redemption. And I want you to know that I don't blame you for what you did. I understand now that you were trying to do the right thing, that you were trying to protect people from me. I was angry when I found out, but that anger has faded, replaced by something else. Gratitude, maybe, or understanding. You gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me the chance to change. I don't expect you to wait for me. I don't expect you to visit me or write to me or think about me after you've read this letter. I just want you to know that I love you, and that I'm sorry for everything I put you through. I'm sorry for the fear, the manipulation, the danger. I'm sorry for not being the man you deserved. But I'm also grateful. I'm grateful for every moment we shared, every conversation, every kiss. I'm grateful for the night you fell asleep on my arm on the train, because that moment changed everything. That moment made me believe that I could be different, and even though it took me a long time to act on that belief, it eventually led me here, to a place where I can finally start to atone for my sins. Live well, Tomoe. Be happy. Find someone who can love you without all the darkness and danger that I brought into your life. And know that somewhere in this prison cell, there's a man who will always carry the memory of you, who will always be grateful for the brief time you allowed him to believe in redemption. Yours, even in absence, Haruto. Tomoe read the letter 3 times, each time feeling the words cut deeper into her heart. She wept as she read, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, from a place she didn't know existed. She grieved for the man Haruto had been, for the man he might have become, for the future they would never have together. But she also felt something else, a kind of peace, a sense that despite everything, despite all the pain and betrayal and impossibility of their situation, something real and true had existed between them. Their love had been complicated and dangerous and ultimately destructive, but it had also been genuine. It had changed both of them in fundamental ways. She kept the letter. She read it again and again over the following months, until she had memorized every word. She thought about visiting Haruto in prison, about maintaining some kind of connection with him. But she knew that doing so would only keep her trapped in the past, would only prevent her from moving forward with her life. Instead, she did what Haruto had asked her to do. She lived. She found a new job. This time working as a translator for a non-profit organization that helped victims of human trafficking. It was meaningful work. Work that allowed her to channel her experience into something constructive, something that helped other people who had been caught in the same kind of darkness that had consumed Haruto's world. She made new friends, people who didn't know about her past, people who saw her as she was now, rather than as the woman she had been. She went on dates with men who were safe and kind and utterly uncomplicated. None of them made her heart race the way Haruto had, but that was okay. She had learned that not all love had to be all-consuming and dangerous. Sometimes love could be quiet and steady and nourishing. Years passed. Tomoe turned 30, then 35. She built a life that was stable and meaningful, if not particularly exciting. She adopted a second cat to keep Sensei company. She bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood. She became someone that her younger self would have recognized but not entirely understood. A woman who had learned to live with her regrets, who had learned to find peace in the aftermath of chaos. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, she received a phone call from Detective Sato. He had retired from the police force years ago, but had kept in touch with her sporadically, checking in to make sure she was doing well. This call, though, was different. His voice carried a weight that she hadn't heard in a long time. "Haruto has been released," Sato said without preamble. He was granted early parole for good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations. He's been out for 3 weeks now. Tomoe felt her heart stop. "Where is he?" "I don't know," Sato said. "But I thought you should know. I thought you should be prepared in case he tries to contact you." After she hung up the phone, Tomoe sat in her living room for hours, unable to move, unable to think clearly. Haruto was free. After 15 years in prison, he had been released. The possibility of seeing him again, of having some kind of conversation with him, of understanding what had happened to him in all those years, filled her with a complicated tangle of emotions that she couldn't begin to untangle. She didn't have to wait long to find out what he would do. 3 days later, she received a visitor. She was working in her garden, planting spring flowers, when she heard the gate open. She looked up, and there he was, Haruto, older now, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with the weight of the years he had spent in prison. He was thinner than she remembered, and there was a gentleness in his expression that hadn't been there before, a softness that suggested that prison had changed him in ways that went beyond the physical. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. 15 years of separation and change hanging between them like a bridge neither of them was sure how to cross. "Hello, Tomoe," he said finally, his voice carrying the same quiet authority it always had, but tempered now with something that sounded like humility. "Haruto," she said, and his name felt strange on her tongue after so long. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said, "but I needed to see you. I needed to know if you were okay, if you had built a good life for yourself." "I have," she said, and it was true. "I'm happy, Haruto. I've moved on." "I can see that," he said, looking around at her garden, at her house, at the evidence of a life well lived. "I'm glad. That's what I wanted for you." "Why are you here?" she asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. "Because I needed to tell you something," he said. "Something I couldn't say in a letter, something that required me to look you in the eye. I needed to tell you that I forgive you." Tomoe felt tears beginning to form. "You don't need to forgive me. I did what I had to do." "I know," Haruto said, "and I'm not saying I forgive you because I think you did something wrong. I'm saying I forgive you because I understand now that you did the only thing you could do. You were caught between 2 impossible choices, and you chose the one that was right, even though it cost you everything." He took a step toward her, and she didn't move away. "I spent 15 years in prison," he continued, "and I spent every single day of those 15 years thinking about you. I thought about the night I discovered your betrayal, about the moment I realized that I loved you more than I loved my own empire. And I realized something, Tomoe. I realized that you saved my life. You didn't destroy me. You saved me. You gave me the chance to become someone different, someone better." "Haruto," she started, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish," he said. "I'm not here to ask you to take me back, or to rekindle what we had. I know that's impossible. I know that too much has happened, that too much time has passed. But I needed you to know that what we had, brief as it was, changed me fundamentally. It made me believe that redemption was possible, even for someone like me. And I wanted to thank you for that." Tomo looked at this man who had once terrified her, who had once held her life in his hands, who had once made her believe that love could exist in the darkest places. She saw in him now the marks of his imprisonment, the lines of suffering and reflection. But she also saw something else. She saw peace. She saw a man who had genuinely changed, who had genuinely sought redemption, who had genuinely tried to become better. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I'm going to disappear," he said. "I'm going to leave Tokyo, leave Japan. I'm going to find somewhere quiet where I can live a simple life, where I can try to atone for the damage I've done. I have money, money that I earned legitimately before I became a Yakuza boss, money that the government couldn't touch. I'm going to use it to help people, to try to undo some of the harm I caused." "That's good," Tomo said, and she meant it. "I wanted to ask you something," Haruto said. "And I want you to answer honestly. Do you regret what happened between us? Do you regret meeting me, loving me, betraying me?" Tomo thought about the question carefully. She thought about the fear and the danger and the heartbreak. She thought about the love and the passion and the sense of being truly seen by another person. She thought about how that relationship had shaped her, had changed her, had ultimately led her to the life she was living now. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. It was complicated and painful and impossible, but it was also real. And I wouldn't change it." Haruto smiled, and it was the same smile that had captivated her on that train so many years ago. But it was different now. Softer, sadder, more genuine. "Thank you for that," he said. "Thank you for everything." He turned to leave, and Tomo felt a sudden panic, a fear that if she let him walk away now, she would lose him forever. But she also understood that this was how it had to be. They had shared something extraordinary, something that had changed both of them, but they couldn't build a future on the foundation of their past. "Haruto," she called out as he reached the gate. He turned back. "I hope you find peace. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." "I think I already have," he said. "I found it the moment I decided to change. Everything else is just the journey." And then he was gone, disappearing through the gate and into the Tokyo streets, leaving behind only the memory of his presence and the echo of what they had shared. Tomo stood in her garden for a long time after he left, holding the pruning shears in her trembling hands. She thought about the woman she had been when she met him. Exhausted, lonely, desperate to be seen, she thought about the woman she had become. Stronger, wiser, more complete. She thought about the role he had played in that transformation, about how love and betrayal and redemption had all been woven together into the fabric of her life. She returned to her gardening, planting the spring flowers with careful attention, nurturing them as they grew. She understood now that life was like that. A constant cycle of growth and decay, of planting and harvesting, of loss and renewal. She understood that the most beautiful things often grew from the most difficult soil, that redemption was possible even in the darkest circumstances, that love could exist in many forms and many contexts. Years later, Tomoe would occasionally think about Haruto and wonder where he was, what kind of life he had built for himself. She would wonder if he had found the peace he was seeking, if he had managed to atone for his sins, if he ever thought about her. But she had learned to hold these wonderings lightly, to let them pass through her mind like clouds moving across the sky, without clinging to them or trying to force them into some kind of resolution. She had learned that some stories don't have neat endings, that some love stories end not with a grand finale, but with a quiet goodbye, with two people acknowledging that they had changed each other in fundamental ways, and then choosing to move forward separately. She had learned that this kind of ending, while painful, could also be beautiful, a testament to the power of human connection, to the possibility of redemption, to the idea that even in our darkest moments, we have the capacity to choose differently. The woman who had once slept on a stranger's arm on a Tokyo train had become someone entirely new. She had loved a Yakuza boss and betrayed him, She had watched him go to prison and had moved on with her life. She had seen him again after 15 years and had let him go. And in all of that, in the love and the betrayal and the redemption and the letting go, she had found something that she had been searching for her entire life. The knowledge that she was capable of surviving anything, of loving deeply even when it was dangerous, of choosing what was right even when it cost her everything. That was her story. That was the story of Tomo and Haruto. A story